Since recording this podcast back in July, Jamie Grundy has since left Cardiff Metropolitan University. He now works freelance, still in the prisons and in the education sector. And if you're interested in his work or contacting him, Jamie's available at jamiegrundy.net on Twitter or on his website www.jamiegrundy.net. So welcome to another episode of the Community Development Podcast. My name is Russell Todd. Thank you ever so much for all the feedback to date. It's a brand new podcast. This is episode number 6. We launched it early July with a conversation with Alan Twelvetrees, author of the seminal sort of text on community development and community work back in 1982. Just released a 5th edition of that book, and it seemed quite appropriate to kick off this podcast and a new medium maybe for community development learning and practice with Alan. Since then we've been up to Brumbo in North East Wales with Brumbo Heritage Project. We spoke community philosophy with Jan Huyton about how that helps and facilitates communities to tackle the big issues of life in a very accessible, non-judgmental, sort of safe way for people. Talked about play work. We've talked about the fan ownership model within sport with the people who run and own their football club in Merthyr Tydfil in South Wales. And we are now going to talk today for episode 6 about the Prisoners Education Trust and its work with offenders and ex-offenders. If you'd like to just introduce yourselves and say a little bit about who you are and what your role is.
I'm Mike. I'm an ex-offender. Was fortunately given funding from PET, Prisoners Education Trust, for a course in Foundation in Journalism last year.
I'm Clare Lloyd and I work for Prisoners Education Trust, and I'm heading up a project working in the Welsh Prisons.
My name is Jamie Grundy. I'm a Community Engagement Officer involved in project work for Cardiff Metropolitan University. Spent a lot of time in the last couple of years working around prisoners education and also refugee education.
And Jamie, you and I crossed paths in a work context,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been quite sort of fascinated really in the ways you were talking about how you engage with prisons, with organisations such as PET, working with prisoners and ex-prisoners. And some of the terms that you were using were terms that I would use in a community development context around empowerment and engagement and facilitation and support and advocacy and things like that. And was genuinely fascinated what you were doing specifically, but realising that is this, I suppose, and maybe I'm a reasonable proxy for a lot of maybe general public, let alone people kind of working in community work, not really kind of clear on what PET does or what this sort of sector is looking to do. So that was kind of the motivation behind trying to get around the mic to talk about this, because there was a lot of shared language, but not necessarily the shared concepts, and hoping to explore some of that today. So in terms of the project, Claire, that you head up,
yeah,
it's a project based in Wales, only Wales.
Yes,
and presumably fits into a bigger picture about what PET, what the trust does.
it does indeed. PET as an organisation is a grant funding organisation, so we offer people in prison the opportunity to apply for funding to take part in all sorts of different distance learning courses. So we've got a vast array of opportunities for people. However, what we found through our experience and through some of our alumni, through some of our learners that have taken part in some distance learning in prison, was that there was more to being a successful learner than just being given a grant funding to purchase a course. That actually giving somebody some education support, some support in building their confidence, of even some support in choosing what sort of course would be suitable, would be something that would be really useful. So the Welsh Project was kind of born out of some of those ideas. However, the kind of overarching thinking was around community and identity. What we wanted to explore was whether or not there was a possibility that you could create a learning community in a prison. And if you could, where could we find them? And if we did find them, what brought people together and what did that look like?
So just to probe the word community then, or its use in this context, to what extent are prisoners or ex-prisoners seen as a community, or would they maybe even identify as a community?
Probably not in those terms, but I think there's groups of people that come together in prisons for all sorts of reasons. For reasons of collective learning, but also collective support, or just a fact that people are there in the same place at the same time, and so they create friendships and create relationships as a result of that. However, as the project matured, I think we began to encourage people to think differently about why people came together, and what we could do as an organisation to facilitate people coming together in a different sort of way than they might have done before. What we did learn was that there was a difference across the prison population in Wales about what that might mean. So our thinking then was much more individual on the specific prison, that actually there might be a very established community in one place, in one part of the prison, but not necessarily in another. So we had lots of learning to do organisationally about that, about how we perceived distance learning in a prison, what that meant, what learning meant in a prison. So we could really have a real kind of a view, a very close view of what that looked like in Wales.
Okay. And again, you're using terms, some of the, sort of jumping on the words and language, using the sort of verbs around sort of facilitating and supporting. And that's what I've done in my background. Jamie, you've worked in communities as well. Yeah. Communities of place, specific sort of places in Wales and outside of Wales, where you talk about supporting people to affect change, to articulate their priorities, to achieve sort of positive change, social action, all those sorts of things. So it's kind of interesting that that's what you're talking about within, would it be fair to say, a very marginalised group of people in society?
I think so, yes.
Whether they're in prison or whether they've left prison, presumably. I said, I don't work in this field, and I know in terms of a lot of the community work that I've done, there will be people who I've worked with, and their offending history might be a factor in why they're being supported, or why they're looking to get involved, or looking to give something back, or whatever it might be. But what's always struck me is that they are potentially, anyway, quite marginalised and discriminated against as well.
I think from my experience, I've got a community development background, and the same approaches, the same opportunities that I've experienced in terms of working in a community setting, in a typical community as in like a little village or a postcode or what have you, or a housing estate, they've all been applicable in terms of working with learners in a prison setting. They have challenges which are common to all of them. They have needs, or whether they be learning needs or maybe even support needs, which are very similar to if I was going to be running a community education class in a community centre on a certain night of the week. There's certain times that work, there's certain times there aren't. What are the facilities like? What equipment do you need? What do you want to get out of the course? Where do you want to go with this course? You've enjoyed this course, where do you want to go next? All exactly the same sort of things that typically in a community development context you're often looking about. Let's do this course because it improves your employability and gets you into work. Well, that may well be the same. That may well be why people want to do a particular education course that we're doing in a prison, for example. But there'll be other issues as well. It may well feed and encourage an increased desire to continue learning, and that's why PET is great at linking in there. But also, thinking about an example that we've got at the moment where we're running a course over at HMP Prescoid. Originally, that course was there specifically to improve the employability of the men who were on a substance misuse support programme. And we came in to deliver a small teaching qualification that nobody else was able to deliver at the time, so we came in and we delivered it. And to encourage the university to run this course, we very much took it as being an employability course, so that the guys would come on the course, they would have exactly the same learning experience as if we did the course out in the community. We haven't changed it in any way, and then we hope then that would act as an extra tick on their CV or an extra qualification, so that if they go into work where they're expected to lead groups, facilitate sessions, run support sessions on a particular subject, essentially teaching by every other name, they would have this qualification so they would know how best to deliver those sessions and get the most out of their sessions.
What you do in terms of that widening access, that sort of outreach provision is a, I'm doing dirty commas with my fingers, but like that traditional community-based learning. So
it's community learning.
Interesting that you've sort of said that consciously you've tried to replicate that in a prison setting.
We did, and interestingly, what that probably came out of wanting, and inadvertently at first, all the people that we had to get on board for this particular teaching qualification, a couple of teaching staff, and then we've got an academic support person as well, and myself. Because of the nature of it being in a prison, it's quite exciting, it's a little bit different for everybody. So everybody suddenly comes forward with like lots and lots of support. But then what we found was that if we weren't careful, we were actually giving people more support than they would have had if they were in a community setting, and you could be criticised of providing not additional learning, but you may be unfavourably prioritising this learner over another learner who might be doing the course on a Tuesday night in a suburb of Cardiff, rather than doing it in a prison. So we had to sort of consciously say, right, what are we delivering? What would we do if it was out in a community's first area in Cardiff? How would we deliver that course then? This is how we would deliver it. It would look like this. We would then take that model and deliver it in the prison and expect the same things of those learners, because if they did that course and they were in the community, they would have exactly the same challenges but get exactly the same positives from the course as well. And that's been good so far. We'll find out on Wednesday when we do the micro teaching, but it should be good.
I think those things are really important as well around demonstrating opportunity. Because if you've had an opportunity whilst you've been in prison and you understand how to be part of that group, how to learn in that certain way, that if there is an opportunity in your community when you're released, you kind of understand it, you know it, you've kind of navigated your way around it already. And so I think there's something about duplicating those experiences, is that you can have a very similar experience in prison as you can in the community.
Okay.
And I've seen that information before about people wanting to get a qualification in prison that doesn't say qualification from HMP. Here's your exam board and that's the name on the qualification. Well, that's what we've done here. We've taken a community learning opportunity, and the people who pass the assessment will get a transcript and a little certificate with Cardiff Met on it. You could have taken it in any part of Cardiff, or you could have taken it in HMP Prescoed. Essentially, you've still learnt the same information, you still set all the same assessment criteria. There's nothing different there about that course.
One of those things was really interesting in the development of the project, thinking about prisoners' identity and thinking about the positive switch, that if you think about yourself and other people think about you as a learner or as a student, then that's going to shift the way you think about yourself and how others think about you. And I think that example Jamie's just given is a real demonstration of how identity can be really important, how people think about themselves and the way in which they are treated and expect that thereafter, so that you can continue that. You now see yourself as I can achieve something. I can be a student at Cardiff Met because I've done it.
Which is empowering them for
Which
them as
absolutely
individuals.
is empowering.
And it's also quite reciprocal as well, because definitely the two tutors that I brought in there at first were quite hesitant about it. So we made sure that I treated with kid gloves. I took a long time meeting with them, talking about things, explained what it would be like. I mainly explained what it wouldn't be like. And then the learners all came into the class, and it was a little bit of the first one or two sessions, it was a little bit unusual. I wasn't there for the next few sessions. I've been there for the final few. It's just like any normal class. There's somebody who's having a problem with this assignment, there's somebody who's helping them, there's a bit of banter going on there. Somebody's forgotten their paper, somebody needs a pen. It's exactly the same as any normal classroom.
I can remember years ago, first ever community development job up in Wrexham in North Wales, and it was the old Objective 2 funded programme around community education, and there was a tutor there who traditionally worked in the private sector and would go in and do kind of ECDL and CLATE and all those kind of IT courses, but within large corporations and manufacturing companies, for example, in the northwest or on the northeast Wales coast. And he came in to do this, and he said he found this so much more interesting and enjoyable, but challenged his teaching practice because he had people that would turn up late, they might turn up at all, but they were dealing with the things that we all have to deal with in life, but perhaps don't have the support mechanisms or have those added complexities around maybe mental health issues, substance abuse. There was a tenancy support program there with what was the National Schizophrenic Fellowship, which was helping people with schizophrenia manage their own tenancies. And some of these people had chaotic lives, but at the heart of it was they wanted to get engaged with IT. And I remember Martin saying at the time, he said, "This is really challenging me, and I find that I'm responding and meeting that challenge with my teaching practice and how I'm able to help and teach these and educate these people." And it's interesting what you're sort of saying. It's one of those things that one of those recurring memories that comes back to me that really is quite instructive and quite kind of powerful as well.
I think it definitely challenges your ability as a tutor, because sometimes there's a tendency to sort of, I've got a really interesting clip on YouTube, I'll pull this up and exemplary, it shows the teaching point that I'm trying to make here. Well, none of our learners and none of our tutors have been able to do that. We know there are restrictions around internet use in the classroom.
Right, okay.
So they've not been able to do that at all. So their presentation they've got loads of little hyperlinks in it. The first thing they did was strip all those out, find different ways to present a point on different teaching styles that you would be expected to use with different types of students. okay, well, you can't show that nice clip you've been using as a tutor for 5 years out in the community. How do you do that differently? So it's definitely taking the tutors back to a point where they've got to think to themselves, right, how do I look within myself, find the skills that I need to get this point across and make certain that the learners are getting the most out of this session they possibly can?
It's really interesting because it demonstrates the challenge that learners have when they're in prison to complete their course successfully, because there isn't any access to internet, there's not access to your tutor at the end of an email, that actually you need to be really motivated, you need to be, quite a tenacious sort of person to be a successful learner. And it's really interesting that actually the feelings of a kind of successful tutoring experience must be the same to feel that as a learner, because you've invested an awful lot in becoming a successful learner whilst you're in prison.
So Mike, you've been nodding a lot. To what extent, on the journalism course that you've just completed, does the experience that sort of Jamie described chime with yours?
That last point was really interesting in terms of, for me, there was a desire to do something productive while I was in prison. So I had the drive to want to learn something, want to learn a new skill. And what's kind of been discussed about that, the challenges of not having the things you're familiar with, the internet, just the resources to hand, it is a challenge. But if you've got the right kind of support in the prison service, then you've got fantastic libraries where you can access information. You've got a limited access to kind of tutors and things, but maybe that takes another couple of days, so you've got time to reflect on things. I felt, having been to university in the past and then doing this kind of distance learning in a restricted environment, that I reflected a lot more on my work, rather than kind of almost I was the one that used to stay up until midnight to submit a paper the next morning, where actually you've got far more time to actually think about what you're writing, think about what you're producing. And the difficulty I had, I guess, was trying to find like-minded people, or that community that's kind of been touched on, is that because of the restrictions, because maybe a computer room is only open for 3 hours in a day, and perhaps in an open prison you've got guys that are going out to work in the day, so where do they go and do their work in the evening? Where in maybe a lockdown prison it's different again, because you maybe some guys are almost forced to go to education, and that's probably not the right attitude to have to education. So there are a lot of challenges, and it is about somebody being determined to change their ways, or to leave with something that can help them in the future, I think.
It's interesting what you said then as well, Mike, about that reflection, because it's quite a new and fancy area of academic learning, is reflective skills and reflective practice. And I certainly found that the guys who I met, they're not as, reactive to things as I thought they may be. They certainly think about things a great deal. And you may say some little point on a Wednesday when we do the course, and then when you come back the following week, they'll pick you up and say, oh, by the way, that thing that you mentioned 7 days ago, and I wanted to ask you about this, what do you think about that? And they'll come up with an incredible question. And it is a really reflective environment, and that's definitely reflected, without wanting to sound like I'm doing a pun there, in this learning experience as well.
I wouldn't disagree, I'm not in a position to disagree, but I challenge only in the sense that for then us to talk about community work and community development, actually, really from quite early on, from the days that when Alan was writing his texts, mid-late 70s, early 80s, actually the reflective element was key. You will do better community work, your practice will be honed and enhanced if you consciously take time out to reflect, and that means you have to plan that into your working week. And it's things that funders don't see as important, because it's not delivery, it's not outputs or outcomes, but actually it needs to be in there. And I think actually maybe in other forms of learning, we say that learning has to be at the heart of effective and genuine community development practice. Maybe in other forms of learning, it's the reflection that's actually they've caught up with community development, perhaps. In that regard.
You're probably right there, and there's quite a lot of academic literature out there. And maybe I'll have to sort of send you a list of them that can go alongside this podcast of reflective practice, academics and practitioners, and it doesn't go back a couple of years; it goes back quite a long way than that. Yeah. So,
but what can be quite simple techniques as well.
Oh yeah,
it takes sort of 5-10 minutes just to kind of hone in and things like that. But it's interesting you sort of say that you jumped on the bit about reflection I prefer to, because that was the bit that really kind of chimed with me there.
I mean, you've got time in what I think people maybe don't necessarily understand is you've got a lot of time.
Yeah.
Unless you become a fan of Bargain Hunt and other
the
daytime programs and the gym. Well, you can fit the gym in as well. But you've got a lot of time, so to find something productive to do. And if you're in a class and then you've got a lot more time maybe to reflect on it, because you haven't got the distractions of a modern society. You haven't got a phone in your hand or the internet. You know, we can all get addicted to Twitter and Facebook and things. You haven't got that. You've got the library with maybe the textbooks you need and a paper in front of you. And so you have got time to reflect on things.
And for someone like myself who's going into that environment and the academics are delivering the course and the students are experiencing the learning and they're asking questions and going back and forth, there's a side of the academic discipline of learning now, which is about reflecting in action. And I would often be at the back just picking up on little things that maybe we needed to work on in the future, or most of the time just catch up with work that I'd never got a chance to catch up before with. But often, one of the things that I do in my work is I do a lot of sort of reflection in action, which I've learned from Jan Heighton, Dr. Jan Heighton's course, some academic learning I've done with her about reflective skills. And the ability for academics or professionals to reflect in that environment is key, because prisoners do not have access to the internet, they don't have access to email. So if there's some question that, when I'm back in the office, I think to myself, what did Josh say? What did Josh say? What did Pete say? I haven't got the opportunity to fire that email up or to give them a call. So I've got to get it down right there and then and reflect on it straight away to make those changes. Because if I don't act on it right there and then, that's gone.
I think picking up on that learning environment is really interesting. And some of the work that Jamie and I have progressed onto is thinking about the progression. So you're in prison and you're a successful learner and you've got some aspirations to continue that learning once you're released. But what does that look like? Who's there to support you? And is there a pathway into higher education? And so what we've been trying to unpick is what the support need is in that transition, because the style of learning is very different when you're in prison. It's either that you're very self-directed and you're very disciplined in your own learning, or that you're kind of channeled into doing some very directed, very kind of authoritative type of learning. So actually then to make a decision, actually, I really want to continue this. This is the best thing I've ever learned. And I've had some amazing conversations with people who have suddenly sparked into learning. Has been the best thing. There's one guy that springs to mind that's doing a maths degree at the moment, and he's so excited about this maths degree. Every time you talk to him, that's all he wants to talk about. His visits with his family have completely changed because all he wants to talk about on a visit is maths. So now his family are doing maths as well, because this is just the contagion of maths in this guy. And this guy is your most untraditional learner that you would ever imagine. However, for him, something sparked, and I don't know what it was that sparked him, but maths has been the kind of...
We talk about that a lot. You can be working on a community somewhere, maybe in a traditional community place, in a state somewhere, and sometimes somebody will walk through that door, or they will pick up the phone, or they will get in touch in some way. They won't come to a committee meeting. They won't. So you have to have those informal and alternative structures. And it might be that step across the threshold, so to speak, has been something they've been meaning to do for a long, long time. And the courage and the confidence that that's taken means that you've got to make that moment count, because it might not come around again. Or someone has a word in the ear, don't bother getting involved with that lot, are they?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think I've always been kind of struck about how you need to be really kind of tuned into when those moments might be, because you might not necessarily recognise them, or for you it's just another person stepped into the office or has tapped you on the shoulder in the town square or whatever. But for that person, that could be something, a culmination of several weeks build up in confidence and courage.
That's the case with it. We know with the guys that we're working with at the moment in Prescoy, they've come through a substance misuse education program called the Chase program that's done very, very well, and they're now doing a teaching course with us. And basically they've done some level 1 courses, they've done some level 2 courses, level 3 courses.
What do those levels equate to if people don't understand?
Well, level 2 is
below GCSE.
Level 3 is sort of like A level or access course or foundation level study, and then level 4 would be the first year of a degree.
Okay.
So they've done those sort of step-based learning on whatever subjects they've chosen, and they're now doing a level 4 qualification with us. And I'm fairly certain they still don't realise it. They're basically doing a module from a degree. They would be completely surprised. There's a couple of guys there who have just never thought of themselves as being a university learner. However, what they are doing right now is they're doing a module that is delivered to people in a university, and they're doing absolutely fine with it,
But that's interesting in itself, because perhaps if they were aware that it was a university thing, it might put them off.
Yes, very true.
Because there is, having been in the system, I was quite surprised at how many people were below average in sort of academic terms. And so you have, for those that don't know, maybe you have different types of prisons. So you have lockdown prisons where it's the more traditional porridge idea, I guess, where you have X amount of hours out to do exercise and go to work, and then you're locked up for the rest of the day. Where you have places like Prescoed, which are open prisons, which are about resettlement and about getting people back into some sort of normality. In maybe locked down prisons, you have more a sense of education being driven by staff or a plan. Whereas in somewhere like an open prison, you may have more flexibility to choose your own path and do things that you feel will help you. You maybe have more flexibility, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And I think I'm right in saying that in Wales, prisoners move around more than in English prisons?
They definitely move around. I don't know whether it would be more, but definitely there's a progression in your prison experience.
So you have that interesting mix in somewhere like Prescoed, where you have guys from all over the UK sometimes, because there are few open prisons for whatever reason. So you have people that have also been in prison for various degrees, various lengths of sentences, where they may have been for 10 years or more. And suddenly they're in an open environment where they give them freedom, a lot of freedoms, but one of those freedoms is how they choose to learn. And that's an interesting kind of experiment, I guess, and whether, if we're talking about community, how you create a community in that kind of environment for education.
Yeah, it's true, and it's interesting because one of the reasons we've worked with Prescoed more is because of that freedom. We have the opportunity to work with guys with a view to progression, so that they are able then to come to Cardiff Met or go to any other university, whichever one they choose, but there's an opportunity for progression there. And we currently have a couple of guys that are studying at Cardiff Met on licence with us. They just go back every night to their own unique halls of residence, as I call it. So they go back to Prescoed every night. The rest of the day they are learners with us, and they're doing great. But what we realised, I think, was when we started to work with them is that certainly one of them, there's two guys, one of them had been at university before, the other one hadn't. But when one of them came to university, he was convinced that people would recognise him as being a prisoner. He was convinced that was what people would look at him as. Actually, nobody noticed. They were more concerned with the fact that he was driving 45 minutes a day to get here. They just thought, "What, you're not local? What are you doing?" That was more what they were interested in. So that's identity and the challenges and the different learning challenges that people have got to meet that you talked about, Claire. It's really important, I think, when it comes to that. I think probably you're in a unique position, really, because you've been able to experience learning outside in the university and then contrast that and compare it to what it's learning is like inside. So.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that that's interesting in itself, that somebody is engaged in a university setting where perhaps they haven't been before and are travelling those distances. So they may feel that they're going to be excluded from this university community because of that reason, because they're maybe not living on campus or close by, so they can't necessarily get involved in social activities because of being on a licence or only being permitted outside the prison for a certain amount of hours, and then having to go back. So that person, if they've been to university before or not, they've got a lot of barriers in front of them before they even walk through the door. And a confidence thing, I think, is part of that as well.
Definitely.
If they've been in a prison setting for, be it 3 months or years, their confidence is knocked, and they maybe do think that they have a big arrow on their head going, he or she has been in prison and they're still in prison.
But all of these are things that we've talked about, again, in a more maybe sort of, I don't want to use a sort of traditional mainstream, but certainly my experience, that place-based form of community work, people who've had negative experiences previously, people who might lack confidence, people who've been told maybe that that's not for you, or have a view that it's not for me, and that gets reinforced, and it's about cultural norms and lack of role models, etc., etc. It's just within maybe a different system, I suppose, that's much more maybe sort of rigid. And
I think it's in a different place. All those things are there. I've faced all those. I've run community learning programs in Rutherglen and Taff, and those things were exactly the same barriers that I had. You'd get people who maybe were told to come to an education programme because it was dependent upon their benefits, so it was a job club and they'd be there and they didn't want to be there, and then
that has parallels with this whole kind of culture of sanction and compulsory job search and all of that sort of stuff. That's, in order to access these perceived benefits further down the line, you have to change your behaviour, conform to this process, and actually have very little influence, if possibly any at all, as to what that actually is, that system is. So I mentioned, Mike, in what you were saying about how around sort of people having the opportunity or even encouraged to design their own learning experience.
Yeah.
And so does that amount to just having, okay, here's a list of courses, what do you want? Or people come and ask you first, what is it that you would like to do, and how would you like to learn within the constraints that you've...
Well, I mean, I think looking at kind of sort of an open prison environment, the purpose of that environment, where there are no walls, there are no gates, is that you are given a degree of trust that maybe you haven't had in a long time, and you're trusted to make independent choices, independent decisions about, you know, everything from what you eat that evening to what work you do and what education you do. And that empowerment means you're ultimately making real life choices. Maybe in a closed environment you feel that you have to do things to progress through the system. There are basic tests that you have to do when you arrive so that the system can establish what level of education you're at before you go any further. There are mandatory courses maybe for those that don't reach a certain standard. Whereas in an open environment there is more flexibility, there is more freedom. And Prisons Education Trust, for example, have prospectuses where you can browse and at your leisure almost, which you have a lot of leisure, a range of courses that may not be suitable for you, but actually it's maybe the first opportunity that you can get to see what is available. And it may get you thinking, you're reflecting, so it may get you thinking about what is it I want to do, because apparently everybody wants to become a plumber, an electrician, or work on the rails, because that's traditionally what a lot of the courses are that you can get in a prison. Whereas actually, suddenly you've got this plethora of courses that mean that you can do a foundation in journalism. You can, that's all I can think of right now. But there's more freedom, and there are staff there. Certainly in my experience, there are staff there to help you navigate through that.
So in terms of your experience, Clare, in terms of the Welsh Project, what kind of learning communities might we find then in prisons? Because it was a term used at the outset, and I'm quite struck by that, because I know of communities first examples, for instance, and other aspects of community action where people kind of go, that's what we want to achieve in a local setting, is a learning community. In a prison context, what are we talking about there?
So first of all, I suppose there's two. There's one about the prison, and then there's also the community that surrounds the prison. So we were interested in both, because I think there's an inevitable importance that those two things connect. So first of all, the communities in a prison, I think they're as diverse as the prisons that we've got in Wales. So what we started to do early on in the project was really explore where the communities might be. So we found an amazing community in a library in HMP Swansea. It was run by some amazing librarians. They were really open to different sorts of activities going on in their library. They encouraged learning. They encouraged people to read different sorts of books, to come to a book club. They were just two very inspiring people. So that kind of contagious process was happening in HMP Swansea. However, it was kind of restricted a little bit to the library. So we kind of thought, okay, so how can we build that community there that was already existing? It was already there, but it was quite small. So we began to talk with the librarians. Could we run some additional groups in your library to kind of build on what you've got? They were really keen. So we started the idea of looking at some academic studies support sessions. And the first one was run at HMP Swansea in the library. And it was great. We had 7 guys there. We talked about what sort of courses they were studying, but then what similarities there were in the things that they were finding challenges with, or in some of the aspects of learning in a prison that they were finding difficult. So the learning community there began as a kind of piggyback onto something that was already well established. But it also was able to pull out some people with some common themes and some common support needs, and that was through the study skills. And we kind of took this idea of, is this something that we're going to find across the other prisons in Wales? That actually the study skills was a really good vehicle in which we could suggest to prisons that we could begin to think about what a community could look like, and either build that upon communities that already existed, like in Swansea and in HMP Park, where there's a really well-established further education department with dedicated staff, with really committed staff that they run GCSEs, A-levels, people doing degrees, one guy currently doing his masters whilst he's in HMP Park. Again, there's a community there. However, how could we help them maintain it and develop it and make it appropriate for that group of learners, because they were different to the group of learners in Swansea. So a lot of what we've been doing is identifying where there might be communities, what can we do to build that and empower those communities to keep going. Our project is only going to last a certain amount of time, but people are always going to be, sadly, in HMP Lloyd and Cardiff and the rest. So part of the reasons we were really keen to develop the learning communities or to enhance the communities that were already there, was really to embed the importance of distance learning in prisons.
So we talk about distance learning,
Yeah.
because it's not a traditional learning environment.
Yeah.
Mike, you've very helpfully explained the distinction between the restricted kind of lockdown environment versus the open. So to what extent then is that key to it?
It's key to it in a sense that that's the opportunity. If whilst you're in prison you want to do something other than the statutory provision of education, so the prison service provide education, but it's up to a certain standard and it's a certain type of generally English and maths and kind of often basic skill type of education. If someone comes into prison and they're coming in at a higher academic level, or they've progressed as they've been in prison, then PET offers the opportunity for distance learning courses, education courses, as well as vocation courses. And what we think is that distance learning really allows somebody to develop themselves and start their own learning journey. MOJ statistics suggest that 25% of people that engage in distance learning are less likely to reoffend. That's a great statistic. And so our work isn't based upon reducing reoffending. Our work is based on encouraging people to participate in education, and often in education for education's sake.
And that's a key thing to emphasise, though, isn't it, in terms of values and principles that you have. But I suppose this work needs funding and paying for and everything else, and so you need those outcomes, don't you?
Absolutely. And one of the great outcomes of our project has been that we've had a 53% increase in people taking distance learning courses in Wales since in the last 16 months. And that's great to know that those people have started their journey. So we're really pleased.
And it's certainly from us, from like a third party's perspective from a university, there's no way we would have been able to do anywhere like the kind of work that we've done in prisons and with prisoners and ex-offenders if it hadn't been for PET's pilot project in Wales. We were kind of like muddling along, doing little bits and pieces, but then by working in partnership with an organisation who obviously know their stuff, then you're able to work more effectively, more correctly, and some of the really good successes that we've had in the last couple of years have been down to that. It is about partnership working. And again, in a way, that comes back to a community development principle. If we as a third party were to go into a community and say, I know what you need, we'll start delivering this particular course, let's all do this course, it would be rejected out of hand. We'd sit there in a classroom that we spent money on and nobody would turn up. But by engaging with, often when we do community learning, we engage with a community's first partnership or a housing association or an established community development organisation. In this case, we've engaged with PET, who've been able to introduce to the right people into the prison who've said, yeah, we've got these people, this is what they need, and then we'll be able to set up those meetings and deliver that learning opportunity. It's following community development principles, but in a very tightly controlled sort of community of place, really.
And that partnership approach has been key to the Welsh project throughout. We couldn't have been successful if we hadn't have sourced similar organisations that do similar things in prisons. So, for instance, St Giles Trust run a really successful mentoring programme in the Welsh prisons, and so we've worked alongside St Giles Trust to understanding what do peer mentors do in a prison and how can we enhance them and upskill them in order that peer mentors can help promote distance learning. And when learners are stuck maybe with course choices or stuck with some of the application process, there's some peer learners there that are experts in that field. So we collaborated with Cardiff Met and with St Giles in producing some toolkits, some handbooks. So with Cardiff Met we produced a learner handbook to help learners kind of navigate that process of distance learning. And we hooked up with Dr. Chris Dennis, one of the, I'm not sure actually.
He's an academic, study skills specialist here at Cardiff Met.
To write this handbook together. And the handbook was an opportunity in which to really demonstrate the uniqueness of being a learner in prison and those different skills that you needed in order to be successful. Is that the start of someone's journey and they're going to think, yeah, I've just finished that course and now I want to do another one, or I've just finished my GCSE and now I think I might do an A-level.
Partnership has come up any number of times in these podcasts. I'm thinking back to the one we did with Merthyr Town around how they were talking about partnerships with organisations with football and sport and the local authority around planning and all those sorts of things. Gary up in Brumbo was talking about traditional maybe statutory providers, a community council and a local authority, but also actually putting quite a lot of effort and work into developing a partnership with funders before getting into bed, so to speak, with them and going to application really kind of spending time with that. And I think that's absolutely crucial, because it's not always clear what we're trying to achieve, or people have assumptions and misconceptions, like maybe more so when you start using words like prisoner and prisons. So I think, I'm pretty sure if I do another 50 of these podcasts, that partnership, not just the word but the actual concept, will keep rearing its head.
It was Jamie. It's just really important for us to be in partnerships with the prisons as well. They've been our most important relationship, is understanding how they work, what that means, what education means in a prison, what it could be, introducing them to each other, because that often doesn't happen either. So that's been really interesting. But also introducing the prisons and education teams in the prison to academic research or different ways of working, and kind of widening that opportunity for people to have an opportunity to kind of make changes.
I think with me, it's in partnership with the prison, but it's about the partnerships within the prisons as well. So, for example, recognising that you're not going to be working with just the education unit, but about working with the resettlement team in the prison. And quite often, what we found, universities are incredibly siloed organisations. One school doesn't talk to another school unless it's over a buffet. In prisons, it's very much, you've got the resettlement team and you've got the education team, and you may have a query that you fire off to the resettlement team, but if it's to do with education, the query may get passed on, it may not get passed on, but you don't know that as an external person. So it's about building those relationships and celebrating those relationships as well.
Peer mentoring is interesting, and we've talked a lot about that within Beauty's First programme over the last couple of years, about the importance of that. And I have my reservations about this to a certain extent, but a lot of Welsh Government strategy lately is around mentoring and coaching people into work, or at the very least closer to the labour market. And I think that clearly has a role. I don't think it's the sum total of what you need to do to get people into work, which is where my reservations lie. But then in terms of what the peer mentoring that the PT does as a whole, to what extent is there a desire for those mentors to be coming from the prison population, or from recent released prisoners perhaps, or from in the open context, and that actually there's almost a sense of beginning to draw on that population and developing almost kind of collective approaches then to education and learning?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in some prisons there's an opportunity for current learners to feed into prisoner councils, and there's some mechanism in which they can influence some of the things that happens in the prisons whilst they're there. But there's also an opportunity for PT mentors or peer mentors or learners, once they're released, to still participate and be an active member at PT through our alumni community. We really encourage people to stay in touch with us, particularly in Wales. If people want to stay in touch with us who maybe haven't managed to complete their course whilst they've been in prison, and we're there to support them to do that if they so wish to. And I think, that was something that Mike was able to do. And the PET alumni community is an opportunity for learners to really influence PET policy and strategy and direction. And we're really keen to ensure that the learner voice is really heard in our organisation, and it's an opportunity for us to do that, to make sure that actually what we're doing is what's needed.
And I think that's what's sort of invaluable, really, is that you can have organisations set up to support anything, but if they're not listening to the service users, if you like, then is anybody doing anything worthwhile? Whereas actually where PT have got at the moment is this alumni community, and then a group that have a board member in their midst that actually sits on the board and reports back any issues. That group can then help maybe inform strategy, has direct experience of learning in a variety of prisons, and all prisons are different. All different. It may have, as kind of Claire's mentioned, we've had really enthusiastic staff in some, maybe not so in others, maybe different restrictions, and actually bringing all of that sort of experience together to help inform strategy, so that PET can go and pass that back to whoever, be it government, be it the prisons themselves, and help improve the kind of journey for a learner is only going to be a good thing, I think. And having been a mentor in the prison system, both in a locked down environment and in an open prison environment, being able to support somebody who maybe is completely new to the system is better coming from another prisoner than coming from maybe somebody that sits in an office with a lanyard and a name tag and knows all about you. I don't necessarily, I'm talking to a guy, I don't necessarily know what he's done. It doesn't matter, because what he wants to do is improve his life through education, which that's all that should matter at that point. I was helping a guy who had no idea how to structure his essay. He had a lovely guide from wherever he was studying from, but that was confusing to him. So sitting down and just going, this is how you structure an essay, this is how you do footnotes, and the basic things that often in university settings you do in the first year anyway. But maybe that's forgotten in prison terms. The basic skills you need to just present your work. That's something you can't phone your tutor about because you can't. Or email your tutor about or something. So having a mentor there that can just support you through that, or even proofread something for you, is invaluable, really.
All the things that you would expect to go on in a university.
The basic things that you would ask somebody
Pop down to the library, speak to somebody in IT about how do you do footnotes, all those kind of things. They have no opportunity to do that.
But you may also have staff in the prison that don't know how to do that. Maybe, or haven't got time to do that or something. So actually having mentors that maybe are upskilled to know that stuff, be it that they've done a course themselves or just that they have a grasp of that structure, is going to help somebody immensely to hopefully complete their course. We're not talking about the content, because I wouldn't necessarily know how to do a personal trainer course, but I can help them structure their essay so that they can present it in the right way. And
it's interesting because that goes back a little bit to some of the community development principles, because when we first met you, Claire, I met with one of my colleagues to say we've got this module that we do on academic skills, we want to deliver it in the prisons, and you said that's great, but it won't work. And again, that was an example of us as a big organisation going to say, we know what to do, this is what we think should be done, and it was me forgetting all my community development training. But really, it's about, you said to us rightly, actually what would be of greater benefit would be an academic skills resource, so that people who, if you're doing level 4, which is undergraduate learning in university, all those academic skills support sessions that you could go to in any university or any college, taking all that information and putting it together in the form of a book and saying to a learner, okay, we know that there are restrictions, you can't get all this information normally, but here's what it looks like, have that. And that's been successful. That's been a much better way of doing things.
That was brilliant. We had access to those in Prescoid, and just for some of the guys who, even basic things like how to structure your research time, just things that you take for granted, I guess, can just help somebody just take a weight off their shoulders. If they're already nervous about maybe doing a course for various reasons, they've committed to it, and those little steps that can help them just structure their time, help them, understand that what they're doing is right, is or as close to right as they can be.
I remember working with a treasurer of a residence group who'd never written a cheque. I remember sitting down with her to write her first ever cheque. She was in her 60s. A traditional, shall we say, married life environment that he was in charge of the money, and she'd never needed to, but she was a treasurer. And I suppose that the relevance of the parallel perhaps there is that, when you set up a committee, you've got constitutions. For some of us, it is just mainstream stuff. The course is delivered in this way, like you alluded to, Jamie. You've sometimes got to go all the way back to basics to think, actually, can it just be dropped in and imported or exported from the usual kind of university environment, for argument's sake?
It's got to be adaptive, but there's no...
Absolutely. And some things about, helping people structure their time, structure how they research, practical things about footnoting and referencing, etc. Again, chimes to me about how we used to talk about it seems to become a bit of a dirty word, is, capacity building. It's giving people those skills and those resources and knowledge to then, next time they're faced with that challenge, whether it's a practical one about an essay or whether it's about deciding what course to do next and how to kind of take another step or two along that learning pathway, that what you're doing is building people's capacity. It's a sort of final, perhaps, discussion point. Mike, you talked about the role of people having in a representative capacity, they influence and maybe kind of provide feedback on how things are managed, how things are delivered. Are there other ways in which the prisoner population can participate in the work of the trust or more broadly with its partners?
I think some of the work that we've been doing in the Welsh Project is looking at how we can encourage the wider community to become involved in prisoners' education and involved in PET. And one of the ways we've done that is to collaborate with other organisations, so one being Open University and Cardiff Met University and hosting some events where we've invited not only prison staff but those organisations that support prisons and support prisoners to come together and to talk about some of the challenges, but also to celebrate some of the successes of prison education. And those events, so there's been 3 in Wales, and there's another one coming up on the 14th of September at De Montfort University in Leicester, and that's going to be hosted by the PLA, which is the Prisoner Learning Alliance. Those events are a real opportunity for like-minded people to come together to talk about prison education, but also to celebrate the success of our learners, which are huge, and we're really proud of them.
Yeah, no, and why not? I mean, that's important, isn't it? And presumably that's a way of identifying or just demonstrating and showcasing sort of role models and that positive change, both sort of within the system, so to speak, and then from outside. Do you find that there's much explaining that has to be done as an organisation about not what you're trying to do and your purpose, but actually who you're doing it with and things like that? Because it goes back to that earlier point around, we're talking about quite a discriminated against, or potentially discriminated against population.
I think within the wider community, yes. Okay. Within the prison education community, no. I think we know what each other does and the part we play. But yes, with the wider community, I think prison education in itself is not understood, and people don't understand. Even I imagine some prisoners don't understand what opportunities are there when you're in prison as far as education goes.
You answered it better than I asked it. Because there is a danger, and again we talk about this, certainly Alan and I talked about this, I think, in one of the podcasts, was around how you can almost just talk within your own circles all of the time. You're preaching to the converted, so to speak, or sometimes you've got to actually inhabit other space, involve yourselves with other people, other sectors, to kind of sort of say, or to challenge almost preconceptions, assumptions.
I think we found it very much so when I attended the first PLA. I found it very, very useful because from an organisation who wanted to work in this area, immediately you were able to find all the contacts that you needed. Also, it dispelled a lot of myths that people might have. So you get to meet people that you maybe have never met before. You get to meet experts in the field. Even from an organisation's perspective, you meet people who have spent time in prison but are now working as criminologists and academics in institutions, which you'd never really made that link before. So it dispelled a lot of myths, particularly on what you could do once you've been in prison and the positive impact that you could then have. So I would say that if anybody was looking to work in this particular area, then definitely look to attend the PLA as a good first point of call.
I'm extremely grateful to all of you for your time. That's been genuinely fascinating for me. I've learned a hell of a lot, and I think what's key is that learning is at the heart of what you do, not just in a very obvious sense, providing education to people, but you appear to be very clearly learning from what you are doing and how you are doing, whether that's specifically the Welsh Prisons Pilot Project, Clare, certainly from some of the stuff you said, Jamie, in terms of how you've adapted course delivery, course content, styles of teaching and things like that. Mike's touched on the peer mentoring and how the actual learning happens, and I think what's great is the amount of possibly enforced or the available kind of time to reflect. We talk a lot about that within community development, but we also talk about the importance of learning as part of that journey. Whatever it is you're looking to achieve, collectively, individually, as individual partners, literally as individuals, then learning is at the heart of that. And I think what's come through this very, very loud and clear is the non-discriminatory way in which that's done, and that non-sort of judgmentalism that all too often is there and has to be tackled and tolerated sometimes because you haven't got the time or the resource to challenge that. The job is the job, and you've got to crack on with that. So that's really sort of refreshing. If people wanted to keep in touch, know more about what you all do, what are your social media outlets and channels, if you know them? I've had them written down for me so I can say them otherwise. Okay, so it's on Twitter, it's @PrisonersEd, and on Facebook it's Prisoners Education Trust, Prisoners S', just to be very grammatically pedantic about this. And so on there will be links to events, links to documents, links to research, but also other things that people are presumably doing themselves, prisoners.
Yeah, and if people just want to get in touch and ask some questions.
Website is prisonerseducation.org.uk. Jamie, from your point of view at Cardiff Met?
Yeah, you can check us out on @Widening Access or cardiffmet.ac.uk/widening access.
Okay, so once again, thank you very much. Best of luck with whatever time is left with the pilots. I mean, how much time have we got left with that project?
We're drawing to an end, but we're hoping to continue with the project for the next 3 years.
Cool, best of luck with the funding and the applications and the partnership arrangements and the lobbying and the twisting of arms that you have to do with that. Mike, best of luck with the journalism.
Thank you.
Coming to the Western Mill sometime soon, or print journalism is dead, that's all I keep being told. But interestingly, one of the podcasts we've got coming up is with community journalism and how people are looking as that as a medium for re-presenting or re-representing how communities are portrayed, how they're involved in the generation of news and the consumption of news, which I think is very, very fascinating, with the community journalism team over at Cardiff University, if I'm allowed Jamie to mention.
I don't mind, it's fine.
Right. Thank you for listening. If you are involved in community development, you might never ever anticipate or expect to be setting foot within a prison complex, and it might well be that you're surprised, as much as I am, to be perfectly honest, the extent to which there are parallels and principles and common values in what we may do in a more mainstream community development sense, in a community place, as there is within a prison context. I hope people have found that useful. Please share the previous podcasts at www.thecommunitydevelopmentpodcast.co.uk, available on iTunes, on Twitter as well as at COMDEVT podcast, and also on LinkedIn. If you would like to come on and discuss different aspects of your community development practice, I would love to hear from you and would love to have the conversation. Contact details are on the website. So to all of you, thank you once again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.